Democratic Whip.
Mr. President, last week I came to the floor on Wednesday to tell the story of some high school kids in Chicago. They did a remarkable thing last Tuesday, 6 days ago. These kids live in a neighborhood known as Little Village, and they go to high school there, to some well-respected high schools, Little Village, Lawndale high schools. They decided on Tuesday to stage a parade in Little Village to protest what ICE is doing to that community and to the city of Chicago. It was peaceful, it was constructive. They marched several blocks, carried copies of the Constitution with them, American flags, Mexican flags, signs that they had prepared. I remember one, I'm going to misstate exactly what it said, but it basically said, our parents have done so much to protect us, now we're going to do everything we can to protect them. I went on Friday to meet with these students. Turned out they were all girls, all women, Latina students. Some reason or another, the boys didn't get into the organization, though they did participate in the parade. These young women, about 15 of them, sat with me in a room and we talked for over an hour about their deepest personal and emotional feelings about what was happening to their families and what they did to stage this parade. Mr. President, I've been to a lot of meetings with a lot of so-called experts on this country and its future, but I learned more in that hour at that high school with those girls, those young women, than in many of those other meetings. They knew exactly what they were doing was dangerous. Their parents had warned them not to stage a parade because the ICE agents had been in the neighborhood in the previous 2 weeks. But they were determined to do something and say something. Most of them were in tears as they talked to me about what they felt personally about this experience. One of the leaders said, I'm an American. I was born here. I love this country and I want to be part of it. Look what it's doing to our families. And another young woman broke down when she said that right before the parade happened, her father had been detained. She said in tears over and over again, my father is not a criminal. Her father's been involved for 7 years to try to get his citizenship status cleared up. He's been back and forth in court. He was in the process of doing this when he was detained and has been spirited off somewhere we don't know. I thought of that experience and what those young girls had been through. And I thought about the courage they showed, their love of this country, their determination to be part of it, but their love of their family and their willingness to risk everything for their parents. That's the reality of life in Chicago and many neighborhoods today. When President Trump announced publicly that he was going to send in the military if necessary, but the ICE forces to go through Chicago, he said he was looking for rapists and murderers and terrorists and the criminally insane. He says it over and over again. Well, guess who he's arresting? Guess who they're detaining? They have yet to report one rapist, murderer, terrorist. They're taking people, they're taking the man that sells the tamales on the corner. I'm not kidding. A man who, for 75-year-old man, who sells what they call elote, which are corn cobs that they steam and are very popular in the community. Rapists, murderers, terrorists, criminally insane? No. Some of them are clearly out of status in their citizenship papers. Some are American citizens. Of all the people that they've arrested and detained, 70% of them have no criminal record. No criminal record, and yet they're being harassed. And they picked the weekend to do that, this last weekend, which is so special to so many American families. I think if I had to pin my wife down on her favorite holiday, it would be Halloween. She loves it. She gets these big bowls of candy, and the kids come from everywhere in our neighborhood in Springfield. And they did just this last Friday. I'm sure many of us had a similar experience. The kids are so excited to get free candy and show off their costumes. And she greets every one of them like they're her grandkids. It's a personal thing. We were worried about this last Halloween weekend in Chicago because of the ICE forces that were roaming the streets. Governor Pritzker asked for a special favor. He asked the ICE agents to take off Halloween night, spare the kids, don't make them worry about whether they go out for candy, whether somebody's going to be arrested. I joined him in that plea. I thought it was common sense. You know what happened? Kristi Noem, who is the Secretary of DHS, said, by no way, by no means, we're going out if necessary. And they did. The ICE agents went to Evanston, which is a town just north of the city of Chicago, and an incident occurred there which was incredible. The ICE agents were roaming through the town looking for landscape workers. Well, guess what's going on? Those landscape workers are raking leaves, and they're doing their work that they do every year. We count on them to do. And this year, ICE was going to arrest them, and they did. Terrible things happened, too. There's a long story. I ask unanimous consent that this story from the Chicago Tribune be entered into the record at this point. Thank you, Mr. President. When you read this article, you realize what is happening here. These ICE agents, whom Kristi Noem calls her dream team, have completely ignored the Constitution when it comes to due process. They are snatching up people right and left. Who are their targets? The Hispanic population, for sure, or anyone who looks Hispanic, or anyone who lives in an Hispanic neighborhood, or anyone who stands on a street corner with a whistle to try to warn off people that the ICE agents are coming. And certainly those who are in the occupations normally filled by immigrants, like landscape workers. Those are the targets. This is a racist effort. I use that word advisedly. It is a racist effort. It is not about terrorists and murderers and rapists. It's about people with an accent, people who look like they're Hispanic. Well, that's what happened in the city of Evanston. And as their vans, unmarked vans, roam through the neighborhoods, these masked secret police of the efforts in the immigration agencies were roaming through the neighborhoods looking for anyone who appeared to be Spanish. And that's what they did. I want to read a statement. They pulled over a man, certainly not Spanish. His name is Morgan Krupinski, part of the great Polish population of the city of Chicago. Listen to what he had to say after he watched the ICE agents go through his neighborhood in Skokie. Skokie resident Morgan Krupinski said 2 workers from an American company were detained. The Scottish Plumber is the name of the company, were doing flood control work on his property in the 8300 block of Harding Avenue when federal agents' vehicles came down the residential street. The agents stopped and demanded documents from both workers, who were able to produce evidence that they were, in fact, U.S. citizens. I'm angry, said Krupinski, who identified himself as a Republican and a conservative. As someone who believes in the Constitution, he said, for someone to be stopped by federal agents because of the color of their skin and their appearance, and to be asked for papers is completely unimaginable and completely unconstitutional. Because where is probable cause? Where is reasonable search and seizure? They're working in a residential neighborhood. And then he said, as someone who voted for this president, I didn't vote for this. I didn't vote for people to be harassed. I didn't vote for people to be brought out at gunpoint with machine guns and to harass Americans. That's in the article that I put in the record. So I say to my Republican friends, if you think you're winning in the popular vote with this approach, think twice. This is not American. This is not necessary. This is intimidation. An intimidation felt by a high school in a little village in Chicago, an intimidation felt by a suburb north of Chicago, which is not usually characterized as Hispanic in nature. But they were going after the workers who were raking the leaves. It's really an amazing experience, historical experience, constitutional experience that we're facing. And it's one that we won't soon forget. And as I reflect on going back every weekend and seeing further evidence of this travesty, I think, bottom line, there are good stories coming out of this as well. Neighbors who finally gather together with their neighbors in the neighborhood and stand up for those who are being harassed by ICE and its agencies. There's another thing that's going on too, Mr. President, that seems to be totally unrelated, but I want to call it out. If you're looking for a kosher delicatessen in Chicago, let me tell you my favorite, Manny's. It's right off Roosevelt Road in downtown Chicago. The Raskin family's owned this deli for many years, 80 in fact. And Danny Raskin, the grandson of the founder of the delicatessen, is running it today. He's a wonderful young businessman. He's struggling with the impact of the trade war and the impact of increasing costs for the basic products he sells. But you won't find a better pastrami sandwich or corned beef or latke or kreplach soup anywhere in America. Danny's is one of the best. Why do I bring in this advertisement for Danny Raskin? I want to tell you why. Manny's Deli, located right by the University of Illinois at Chicago, has been a legend in the community for 8 decades. If you walk into Manny's, you'll see a microcosm of the city of Chicago. People from everywhere, every kind of background, join together over a fondness for his hearty portions and delicious sandwiches. Manny's has been a staple of this community, and today they announced they will provide free meals for those on SNAP. Free meals. Why has Manny's found it necessary to feed those on SNAP? Because President Trump became the first president in history to deliberately disrupt the processing of November SNAP benefits, jeopardizing 42 million Americans' food security. Although the Department of Agriculture was told by 2 federal courts that they had the authority to fully fund SNAP, today they announced they'll only pay half of November benefits. That is going to cause a real hardship to the millions of Americans who count on what used to be known as the food stamp program. Thankfully, Manny's Delicatessen in Chicago is willing to do what the Trump administration is not, working to make sure that nobody in their city goes hungry. They're going to offer a sandwich, a potato pancake, and some dessert to these people who come in with SNAP cards. I'm grateful to the great staff at Manny's and their owner, Danny Raskin, for their generosity as SNAP payments are cut under President Trump. And Manny's isn't the only restaurant in the city of Chicago helping those on SNAP. It's one among many stepping up across Chicago to make sure that Illinoisans don't go hungry. Taza Italian Ristorante, Wooden Paddle, and one of the better pizza places, Lou Malnati's, other restaurants as well, are offering SNAP recipients free or discounted lunch during the month of November. I'm grateful for their assistance as Chicagoans face the reality of President Trump's cruel SNAP cuts. And I hope we here in Washington will learn from the kindness demonstrated by these restaurants and that they will work as hard as they do to feed and keep America safe. Let me just add in closing, there's another man involved in this story, and I want to mention his name. It's Wayne Gordon. Wayne Gordon was a minister of Lawndale Christian Church for over 40 years. He graduated from Wheaton College, went into the ministry after he had coached basketball at Farragut High School, and started the church in the Lawndale section, a poor, largely black section of Chicago. But he and his wife moved there 40 years ago and still live there to this day. They started Lawndale Christian. He is an evangelical minister who prays for me every day, thank goodness, and I try to return the favor. But I'm sure he was the mentor that Danny Raskin mentioned as his inspiration for providing this food. Hats off to Coach Wayne Gordon and Danny Raskin for this amazing display of caring at a time when it's needed more than ever. Let me close by saying this, Mr. President. We can solve this problem in the Senate, and we can do it this week. There is no excuse. The President is back from his trip overseas. The House can be called into session and return, and they should be, sooner rather than later. And we can sit down and work out the problem of what to do with skyrocketing health insurance premiums. Let me tell you what I've been told by the Illinois Department of Insurance. They told me that hospital insurance premiums are going to double in the northern part of our state near Chicago and triple in the rural small town sections downstate. Triple the current level of health insurance premiums. How in the world will a family struggling to get by paycheck to paycheck manage that? That's a legitimate question. My Republican friends should join me in asking that question. And they should go beyond these vague references the president made last night on 60 Minutes about we have some ideas. I've heard that for years now, and we don't know what those ideas are. What we should do is sit down and work together to solve both problems. Open up the government, which we can do when we reach an agreement, and we can, of going forward on health costs that are going to make 24 million Americans lose their health insurance. We all should share feelings about the families that are struggling with this, both things, and we can do it if we work together. Drop the fanfare, close the door, find a table, invite the president and the leaders, Republican and Democrat, get it done this week. We can do it. I believe we can if we have the will to do it. I hope some people will step up on the other side of the aisle and join in this bipartisan effort. It's the only way to end this government shutdown. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to the tongue nomination.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we are now over a month into a shutdown caused by the refusal of Senate Democrats to vote for a short-term stopgap spending bill that expires November the 21st. So much time has passed that we're now only 3 weeks out from that new deadline, even if they were to vote to pass this short-term funding bill that's passed the House of Representatives. This cannot be explained by logic or reason. This can only be explained by politics and by the Democratic leader's desire to keep his job and to survive in the next election. Because he's afraid of his own political party and that they will throw him overboard if he were to agree to a short-term stopgap spending bill, which we did 13 times when President Biden was in office. But we're also hearing that they want us to negotiate the expiring Biden COVID-era subsidies for the Obamacare exchanges. And since they want to talk about that, I would just reiterate what President Trump has said, what Speaker Johnson said, what the Majority Leader of the Senate has said. We're happy to talk about anything and everything you want to talk about once you reopen the government. But since Democrats brought it up, and since they still insist on keeping the government shut down, endangering people flying, causing enormous inconvenience at the International Bush Airport in Houston, there's a 3-hour wait for people to get simply through the security line at TSA. We know 42 million people have been denied access to supplemental nutrition some of the most vulnerable people in our country. And we know federal government employees are not being paid, even though they are obviously working. I have not heard a single Senate Democrat saying, well, I'm going to withhold my pay during this shutdown, as those of us on this side of the aisle have done, including yours truly. So presumably they'd continue to get paid while everybody else is not being paid, and why enormous numbers of the most vulnerable of our population who depend on supplemental nutrition for food on the table are being denied that relief, all because they are afraid to deal with the politics associated with simply passing a short-term stopgap spending bill. But they also say they want this conversation to be about health insurance. And since they want to talk about Obamacare, I figured I would oblige them. Now, we know health insurance rates have certainly continued to go up. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that the cost of a family health insurance plan in 2025 is nearly $27,000. If you're on one of the 16 million people on the Affordable Care Act exchanges, your premium is scheduled to go up 18% next year. 18%. At the same time, if you're on an employer-provided insurance plan, premiums will go up roughly 6 or 7%. 6 or 7% versus 18%. Well, there must be a good reason for that astronomical figure for the Obamacare plans, and I plan on mentioning a few reasons why that is so. Well, employers are paying for much of the health insurance premiums for their employees, but the increased cost eats away at the budget they have to pay wages and other benefits. So employee salaries will become stagnant as employers have to pay more each year for health insurance. And for small businesses, the margin is even greater, or I say the margin should be smaller. The increased cost of health care for their employees might mean they can't offer generous raises, or might mean they can't afford to hire as many people as they previously did. So clearly, the rising costs of health care and health insurance is a problem for individuals and employers. But a fair question is, how did we get here? Well, the first place we have to look is Obamacare, popularly known as the Affordable Care Act. The fact of the matter is, it is the Unaffordable Care Act. When President Obama signed this highly controversial signature health care plan into policy, he promised that it would make health insurance affordable for the American people. In 2016, in a speech to students in Florida, President Obama said, "The Affordable Care Act has done what it was designed to do. It gave us affordable health care." Now, 15 years later, this claim has aged like spoiled milk. Since 2013, the year before Obamacare took effect, the average Obamacare enrollee faced a premium increase of 221%. That's since 2013 until today, 221% increase in the premium. This mind-boggling number is only for those who receive health coverage through the Affordable Care Act, which is, of course, as I indicate, a misnomer for the ages. Those who receive their coverage through their employer-sponsored plan were not affected by these premium hikes. As I mentioned, the Wall Street Journal said their premiums will go up roughly 6 to 7%. From 2013 to 2019, Individuals buying health insurance on the private market faced 143% increases in their health care premiums. And this number does not account for all the Americans who kept their plans but faced increased premiums or less comprehensive coverage. President Obama knew, but he refused to say, that for many people, even though this new health care law claimed to make health care affordable, it did just the opposite. So what did he do? He tried to shift the blame. The claim that the Unaffordable Care Act would make health care affordable was far from President Obama's only broken promise. In a quip that was later described by a political fact-checking site as the lie of the year for 2013, President Obama said that, quote, "If you like your health care plan, you can keep it." 2013, a political fact-checking site called that the lie of the year. But we know how the story has ended. By the fall of 2013, 4 million Americans received letters informing them that their then existing health care plan would be canceled. In the same 2016 speech, he said, "Now, some people may say, well, I've seen my co-pays go up or my networks have changed, but these are decisions that are made by your employers. It's not because of Obamacare. They're not determined by the Affordable Care Act." Now, that was a complete and utter abdication of responsibility for the disruption that Obamacare caused. And while it may be true that they were not directly determined by the Affordable Care Act, it is because of the Affordable Care Act that people lost their coverage, and thus they could not keep the coverage they had if they wanted it. Obamacare did not make health care affordable. It created a tangled web of regulations alongside of taxpayer-funded subsidies that ultimately only led to higher costs for taxpayers and those receiving care. The only party that stood to gain the benefit from the Obamacare chaos was the health insurance companies themselves. They've enjoyed a windfall as a result of Obamacare. By now, insurance companies have figured out how to use this muddled mess, that is the Democrats' health care system, to lobby for government subsidies, including the continuation of the expiring COVID-19 era subsidies that the Biden administration imposed. They knew that Democrats would not want to be responsible for the increased premiums and lower coverage, so they threatened premium increases while lobbying Congress to give these insurance companies even more money in the form of enhanced subsidies. In 2025 alone, U.S. government health care subsidies paid directly to insurance companies totaled more than $130 billion. That's your tax dollars paid to insurance companies, $130 billion in 2025 alone. In some cases, these subsidies pay for phantom enrollees who are likely not even to know that they are covered by one of these policies. In 2024, there were approximately 12 million Affordable Care Act marketplace enrollees who made zero medical claims, a highly unusual circumstance. 12 million, no claims. Roughly 40% of those fully subsidized by the Biden-era COVID credits made zero claims, meaning that these insurance companies received these very generous subsidies but incurred zero costs. Since 2021, the cost taxpayers have incurred to subsidize Obamacare plans has increased a staggering 150%. And many of the ones on these policies are far from the most vulnerable in our population. In 2021, when the Democrats lifted the cap on these subsidies, removing the income eligibility limit, Households earning upwards of $500,000 were made eligible for taxpayer-subsidized plans. So you tell me why taxpayers should have to subsidize somebody who makes $500,000 a year and buy their health insurance policy for them. These increasingly expanded subsidies for high earners proves a point that was perhaps the only promise that Obamacare actually kept, that the Affordable Care Act was just the first step toward a taxpayer-funded health care system, a single-payer system. Back in 2016, President Obama compared his signature law to a starter home that would later be upgraded into one that would be much bigger. But based on the way the law actually worked, it's clear that expanding it is not going to make people better off, just the contrary. So here we are in 2026, and what happened? Are we living in a utopia where health care is free or suddenly affordable? Well, just the opposite. Health care is now more expensive than ever, with analysts warning that increased costs will continue to eat away at workers' paychecks. Millions of Americans have faced cancellations of their private insurance plans, while many more are facing devastating premium increases. And then there are the insurance companies who've reaped hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies while continuing to raise premiums on patients. I think it's safe to say, Madam President, that Obamacare was a golden promise that turned out to be almost entirely false. So when we look for a solution to rising health care costs, we should be wary of listening to the same people who sold us Obamacare on false premises, and not trust those who would prefer we continue to prop up a failed system that enriches insurance companies while leaving Americans to pick up the pieces. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I would note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Osterbrooks.